The sunset bled across the horizon like a wound that refused to close. The sky burned crimson and gold, casting long shadows over the empty prairie. The sound of a tired saddle creaked with each step, the hollow thud of hooves beating out a rhythm against the dry earth, heavy and final like funeral drums rolling through the wind. Elias Ward rode slowly toward the crooked gate, his wiry frame bent with years of labor, his clothes weather-worn and patched from too many hard seasons. A poor rancher alone on the edge of nowhere, he asked little of life except another day of quiet survival. Yet fate rarely asks a man's permission before it changes everything. His horse snorted, ears twitching at something ahead. Elias pulled the reins tight and froze. What he saw made his breath catch sharp in his chest. Hanging from a rotting wooden beam were 4 enormous female bodies, each bound with rough rope that cut deep into their shoulders. Their heads slumped, their heavy frames swayed gently in the dying light. Beads of Apache craftwork rattled in the breeze, a broken song of sorrow whispering across the dust. A crude board leaned against the post, carved with one word, traitors. Next to it, the red seal of Judge Caleb Morgan glared like a brand of death. Elias's stomach twisted cold. Were they truly gone? Or had life not yet fully left them? He tied off his horse and stepped forward, hands trembling, knife ready to cut the ropes. But whose judgment had hung them here, and for what cause? Was it justice or a trap laid in blood and lies? Stay with me, because what Elias found in that moment would turn the prairie into a battlefield, and no one watching would forget it. Elias's boot struck the brittle ground as he swung down from the saddle, the rope knife already in his hand. The air was thick with dust and the copper taste of fear. His horse pawed nervously, snorting, ears pinned back at the sight before them. Elias's chest tightened. 4 immense women hung from the beam like broken effigies, shadows stretching long across the prairie. The last light of the sun painted their still bodies in fire, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to the cruelty carved into this land. He didn't think. He moved. The first rope fought him strands, digging into his calloused palms as he sawed with the blade. The body dropped like a felled tree, shaking the ground as it hit. Elias dropped to his knees, pressing an ear against the woman's chest. A faint rhythm, uneven, desperate, still pulsed there. Alive. Against all odds, she was alive. His breath came ragged, but he didn't stop. He ran to the second, muscles straining, knife flashing. The hemp parted, and again a massive body slammed into the dirt. Dust rose around her like smoke. For a moment he thought she was gone, eyes glazed, lips cracked. Then with a shudder her chest lifted. Her dark eyes flickered open, unfocused, staring through him as if she saw another world. Elias whispered a prayer he hadn't spoken in years. The third was heavier still. The rope burned against his blade. When she fell, her breath returned with a torn, rattling cough that sounded like a drum with its skin ripped apart. Blood stained the earth beneath her side. She would not last long without help. Elias ripped a strip of cloth from his sleeve and pressed it hard against the wound, his hands trembling as he tied the knot. The fourth. Elias hesitated. The rope bit deep into her neck, her head slumped lifeless. He cut her down anyway, lowering her as gently as his wiry arms allowed. Her body carried only a fading warmth. He pressed his hand to her throat, desperate for a pulse. Nothing. The prairie wind moaned through the rafters, as if mourning with him. And then something slipped free. From her sleeve, a silver pendant rolled into the dust. The faint moonlight caught its etching, a river winding across its face. Elias froze. Memory crashed through him. 3 moons ago, he had pulled a young Apache girl from drowning in such a river. She had clung to his shirt with that same pendant around her neck. He had thought little of it then, only that he saved a child. Now the symbol glared up at him, binding past and present, with a shiver that cut deeper than any knife. What did it mean? Who were these women? And why had Judge Morgan marked them as traitors? He didn't have answers. He only had 4 lives, 3 flickering, 1 extinguished, that now rested in his shaking hands. One by one, Elias dragged their massive bodies toward the stable. Each step was a battle. His wiry frame strained, his back screamed, sweat stung his eyes, but he did not stop. The wooden beams groaned as he rolled the women inside. His horse whinnied, eyes wide with terror at the towering shapes sprawled across the hay giants out of some half-remembered legend. The oil lamp's weak flame cast long shadows over their faces. One breathed in ragged gasps, chest rising and falling like a torn bellows. Another bled steadily, her skin pale beneath the dirt. The third burned with fever, eyes shut tight, sweat slicking her brow. Elias tore rags-bound wounds with trembling hands, whispered curses at his own clumsy stitches. He had mended fences and broken saddles, but never lives as heavy as these. The air was thick with dread. Every sound from outside felt like a threat. The whistle of wind, the creak of wood, the echo of hooves far away or only in his mind. Elias paused, knife still red with rope fibers, breath caught in his throat. He glanced at the door, at the shadows, stretching under the threshold. Was Morgan's patrol already here? Had someone seen him cut them down? He doused the lamp, plunging the stable into a darkness, broken only by shallow breaths and the restless shift of horses. His heart pounded like a war drum in his chest. Somewhere beyond the gate, laughter floated on the night wind, cruel and sharp. He gripped the silver pendant in his fist, pressing its cold edge into his palm. Fate had bound him to these women, just as surely as the ropes had bound them to death. And he knew with a certainty that chilled his bones, this act of mercy had drawn a line in the dust. There would be no turning back. The stable smelled of sweat, hay, and blood. Elias crouched by the women, pressing another strip of cloth into a wound that refused to stop bleeding. The silver pendant still lay on the dirt near his boot, glowing faintly in the lamplight like an omen. His hands shook as he tied the knot, then pressed down harder, whispering to the woman, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. A sound cut through the silence. Hooves. Not one or two. Several. Elias froze his head, snapping toward the gate. The steady rhythm of horses carried across the prairie mixed with the harsh laughter of men. His heart slammed against his ribs. He snuffed out the oil lamp, plunging the stable into thick darkness. The wounded women shifted faintly, one groaning low. Elias pressed a finger to his lips, though they could not understand. Silence. They needed silence. Outside, the night wind carried voices. Over here. The gate's busted. Look at the dirt blood. Lantern light flared beyond the broken fence, yellow beams slicing the dark. Elias slid toward the stable door, gripping the knife still wet with rope fibers. His horse stamped nervously, sensing the danger. The patrol stopped in front of the ranch. 5 riders, dark silhouettes against the night sky. Their lanterns swung high, spilling light over the ground. One man dismounted, knelt, and pressed his hand to the soil. He rubbed his fingers together, then raised them to his nose. "This ain't cow's blood," he said. His voice was flat, certain. "Too thin. And look, footprints. Human. Twice the size of mine." Elias's chest tightened. He glanced back at the stable. The women's massive forms lay half hidden in shadow breaths, ragged but alive. If those men found them, it was over slaughter in the dirt before midnight. He stepped out into the open. The lantern light caught him a gaunt figure, gray stubble, weathered face lined from years of prairie wind. His eyes were cold as stone. He forced his voice steady, though fear burned his throat. "Evenin'," he muttered. "Only thing bleeding here is my cow. You're spooking her with all that racket." The riders turned, suspicion sharp in their eyes. The leader leaned forward in his saddle, squinting. "Ward. Still breathing, I see." His voice rasped like metal dragged across stone. Elias held his ground, the stable door just a step behind him. "That's right. And no Apache in sight. Their blood's in the dirt, nothing more." The dismounted soldier rose, lantern in hand. He raised it higher, pointing at the ground. "Look here. Fresh prints. Too big for any cow, too heavy for any horse." The men shifted uneasily. One spat into the dust. "Apache has been here. We can smell him." Elias's fingers clenched around the pendant in his pocket. He knew he could not fight 5 armed men alone. His Winchester was inside, out of reach. His only weapon now was his voice, and whatever memory lingered in the minds of these soldiers. He drew a long breath. Then he spoke. "If I'm hiding anyone," Elias said, his tone low but firm, "then come dawn by Apache law, we face the trial of courage. No blood is to be spilled at night." The words hung heavy in the air. The soldiers exchanged quick glances. They were not Apache, but they knew the law. To break it meant provoking the wrath of the entire tribe. They might not respect the custom, but they feared it. The leader sneered, but his hand dropped from his pistol. "Fine. Come sunrise, Ward, you'll die for defying Judge Morgan. May the Lord have mercy on your soul." They turned their horses. Lantern light bobbed across the dirt road, growing fainter as the patrol rode into the dark. Laughter trailed behind them, cruel and mocking. Dust rose, then settled. Silence returned. Elias stood alone, heart hammering. His hand slipped from the pendant, now slick with sweat. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For now, he had bought them a few hours of life. No more. He turned back to the stable. The women lay in shadows, their breaths uneven, their eyes half closed. But one was awake now. Ayanna, the tallest, broadest of the four, was staring at him. In the darkness, her gaze was no longer filled with fear. It held something else. Something like trust. Elias leaned against the doorframe, shoulders heavy. He knew what dawn would bring. Judge Morgan himself would come. And when he did, there would be no lies, no hiding, only the trial of courage. The prairie wind swept cold through the broken fence, whispering across the dirt like a blade being drawn from its sheath. The night stretched long, every minute a lifetime. Elias sat with his rifle across his knees, eyes on the horizon, waiting for the first touch of dawn. The night dragged on like an endless drumbeat. Elias sat in the dark stable, his Winchester balanced across his knees, every muscle in his body taut as a drawn bowstring. The groans of the wounded women behind him mixed with the restless shuffling of horses. Sleep never came. He knew what waited when the sun broke over the horizon, truth, blood, or both. A streak of pale gray bled into the sky. The prairie wind carried the scent of dust and pine, cold and sharp enough to sting the lungs. Elias rose stiffly, his shoulder aching from strain, his eyes burning. He pushed the stable door open, stepping into the first fragile light of dawn. Beyond the broken fence, the land stretched wide and empty until it wasn't. From the north, the sound of hooves swelled heavy as thunder. Dozens of riders crested the ridge, their silhouettes tall against the rising sun. Dust billowed behind them like a storm cloud rolling in. At their head rode Chief Taza Greyhawk, mounted on a black horse, his back straight, feathers swaying in the wind. Beside him, 12 elders marked with paint and eagle plumes rode in solemn silence. Elias's gut tightened. The Apache had come. But before relief could set in, another sound rose from the south. Another column of riders. Lanterns glinted off rifles strapped to saddles, off polished pistols and black coats flapping in the wind. Judge Caleb Morgan's patrol, nearly 20 strong, rode hard across the plain. At their head, the judge himself sat tall, on a gray horse, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing half his face, his eyes sharp and merciless. The prairie had become a battlefield, long before the first shot was fired. Elias stood between two storms. Behind him in the stable, the 4 massive women lay breathing, 3 clinging stubbornly to life, 1 already returned to the earth. The lines had been drawn. Now the truth would decide whether the prairie bled or endured. The 2 columns converged before the rotting fence of Elias's ranch. Dust hung thick, swirling around them, caught in the growing light. Chief Taza raised his staff, his voice deep and commanding. Ward, he called, his accent harsh but steady. You have touched what was not yours. Elias did not lower his rifle. His voice was raw, but it carried. I saved lives hanging by a thread. Is that a crime? The elders muttered in Apache voices heavy with suspicion. One spat into the dirt, another lifted a hand as if to demand vengeance. But before the weight of their judgment fell, one of the giant women stirred. Ayanna, taller than any man in the field, stumbled from the stable, leaning on the beam for support. Her shoulders broad as timber glistened with sweat, blood streaking down her arm. Her voice cracked but carried like thunder. Had it not been for this man, we would be carrion swinging in the wind. Where is the honor in killing women to steal land? The elders fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. But the stillness shattered as Morgan's voice cut through. Lies, the judge's tone was shrill, laced with venom. He yanked a rolled document from his coat and held it high. These 4 murdered the Morrison family. I have warrants signed and sealed. You want proof. Here it is. He unfurled the parchment, red wax glinting like fresh blood in the sun. His men shouted behind him, voices echoing justice. Justice for the Morrisons. Taza's eyes narrowed. He raised his staff again, his voice calm yet slicing. And what law carves your seal into rope and hangs women like cattle? Ayanna lifted a length of rope, still scorched with Morgan's seal, blackened and crusted with dried blood. She flung it into the dirt, before all to see. Gasps rippled through the Apache line. Even a few of Morgan's men faltered, eyes darting uneasily between judge and rope. This is the proof, Taza thundered. The hand of greed, not justice. The hand of a man who wears law like a mask to steal what he cannot earn. Elias stepped forward, his voice hoarse but unyielding. He raised his trembling hand, pointing at Morgan's soldiers. I saw it, Elias said. Copper dust on your men's gloves. A map tucked in your coat. He locked eyes with Morgan. You mapped the veins beneath this ranch. These women were your excuse. You framed them, hanged them, just to take the land. The prairie went still. The words cracked like lightning across dry timber. Morgan's face flushed red, then purple. He pulled his Colt, leveling it at Elias. Lies, he roared. This rancher drinks with savages, and now he dares accuse me of theft. I am the law here, me. His horse reared as he spat fury, but his voice betrayed something else, fear. Taza's eyes cut like a blade. If law means hanging women for profit, then law is nothing but a thief's cloak. The soldiers shifted uneasily. Some lowered their rifles a fraction. Doubt, once sown, spread like wildfire. Chief Taza raised his staff high, his voice booming over the restless riders. If blood must speak, then let this dawn be the witness. Judge, do you dare enter the circle of courage? The words fell heavy. Every man knew the trial, two sides facing one another in the open, weapons drawn, courage deciding who lived, who fell. It was not war, it was judgment by dawn. Morgan hesitated. For the first time his eyes flickered, but then he sneered, forcing bravado into his voice. Fine, this dawn then. Whoever bleeds first proves the truth. And Ward, he jabbed his pistol toward Elias. I'll hang your corpse from this fence. The dust swirled thicker, choking the light. Elias's palms sweated around the stock of his Winchester. He felt the eyes of everyone, Apache soldiers, even the giant women pressing down on him. This was no longer his land alone. It was the stage for a reckoning. The silence stretched taut. Horses snorted, pawing at the ground. Fingers curled around triggers. No one moved. And then a shot cracked the air. It came from Morgan's line. The bullet screamed past Elias, splintering the wood of a nearby post. Chaos erupted. Rifles flared, pistols barked, horses reared in panic. The prairie exploded into smoke and thunder. Elias dove behind the shattered fence, his shoulder slamming hard into the dirt. His Winchester spat fire, dropping a rider who came too close. Screams tore through the dust. Ayanna charged from the stable, tall as a pillar of stone. She ripped a plank from the wall and swung it like a warhammer, sending two soldiers flying. Another of her sisters seized a rifle bare-handed, wrenching it free and hurling it aside before slamming into a horse, toppling both beast and rider. For a moment both sides froze in awe. The women, once thought hanged and broken, now rose like avenging legends. "Kill them!" Morgan shrieked. His voice cracked with desperation. Kill them all. But his men hesitated, eyes wide at the sight of the towering figures. Doubt weighed heavier than fear. Chief Taza loosed an arrow that struck a soldier aiming at Elias. His voice roared through the smoke. The truth is here. This land is not for the greedy. The chaos thickened. The Angus herd, spooked by gunfire, burst from behind the barn, stampeding through the melee. Dust and hooves swallowed men, horses, and cries alike. In the frenzy, a folded paper slipped from a soldier's coat. Elias lunged, seizing it. Through smoke and blood, he raised it high. The judge's red seal glowed in the sunlight, stamped atop a copper map. This, Elias shouted, his voice raw and tearing through the storm. This is why they were hanged. Morgan wants the copper, not justice, the soldiers faltered. Some froze mid-fight. Others lowered their rifles, staring at the paper in disbelief. The tide shifted, the lie exposed. Morgan screamed, his voice shrill. Do not listen, he is nothing. Kill them, damn you. But his authority cracked. Fear rippled through his ranks. One by one, men looked away, weapons drooping. Morgan, wild with rage, spurred his horse straight at Elias. His pistol blazed. The first shot tore through Elias's shoulder, fire ripping across flesh. He staggered, blood soaking his shirt, but did not fall. Ayanna roared, stepping before him like a wall of flesh and fury. Her massive hand seized Morgan's wrist, twisting, until bones snapped with a sickening crack. His pistol fell, discharging harmlessly into the dirt. You hanged my sisters like cattle, Ayanna growled, voice like breaking stone. Now justice will hang you. She hurled him to the ground, dust rising around his broken frame. He scrambled, drawing a hidden dagger, only for an arrow to pin it into the earth beside his hand. Chief Taza sat tall, his bow still raised, his eyes hard as steel. No more blood, he declared. The truth has spoken. The tribe will judge. The battlefield stilled. Smoke drifted like ghosts across the dawn. Soldiers stared at their broken leader, at the copper map, at the towering women still standing. Some tossed their rifles aside, others turned their horses and fled. The sun cleared the ridge, blazing like a blade of fire across the land. Elias, bloodied but unbroken, clutched the map. He knew this dawn was not the end. It was the beginning of something larger: justice, war, or both. And as silence returned, the question lingered heavy in the air. Would the prairie remember mercy or drown in vengeance? The stampede of hooves had barely settled when the prairie roared alive with fury. Smoke curled, low dust clung thick to the rising sun, and the sharp crack of rifles tore through the dawn. Elias staggered behind the splintered fence, his Winchester flaring in his hands. Each shot rattled his bones, each recoil burning his shoulder wound raw, but he held the line. The copper map, its red seal glistening like fresh blood, was clenched against his chest, as though it were life itself. Ayanna rose beside him, taller than any man, her shadow cutting through the smoke. Her voice carried like thunder as she swung a broken beam into a charging rider, the man and horse collapsing in a heap. Two of her sisters stormed forward, one snatching rifles barehanded, another seizing the reins of panicked horses and driving them into Morgan's men. Their towering forms moved like living legends, as though death itself had returned them to claim vengeance. Soldiers froze, fear flashing in their eyes, for these were no longer women. They were giants who had walked from the gallows to mete out justice. Morgan shrieked from the saddle, his voice cracked and desperate. Kill them all, his men wavered. Some fired wildly into the haze, others shifted back, rifles trembling. The truth of the copper map spread faster than orders. Doubt gnawed at loyalty. Elias, bleeding, raised the paper high. This is the reason, he shouted, voice breaking but fierce. Not justice, not law. Copper. He hanged them for greed, his words cut through the battlefield louder than gunfire. Soldiers' faltered eyes locked on the judge, his mask of power crumbling under the morning sun. Morgan's face twisted, rage consumed him. He spurred his horse straight for Elias, his pistol flashing. The first shot tore through Elias's arm, hot iron ripping flesh. He reeled, vision swimming, but before the second shot fired, Ayanna thundered forward. Her massive hand closed around Morgan's wrist, twisting until bone cracked. The pistol clattered into the dirt. She roared into his face, breath like fire. You hanged my sisters. Now justice will hang you. She hurled him from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, choking on dust, clawing for a hidden dagger in his boot. But before steel could taste blood, an arrow struck into the earth beside his hand, pinning the blade. Chief Taza sat tall atop his black horse, bow drawn, eyes like steel. His voice carried over the chaos, sharp as judgment. No more blood. This ends now. The battle slowed, smoke drifting in ghostly sheets. Soldiers looked at one another, weapons slack in their hands. Some tossed rifles into the dirt, others spurred their horses away, unwilling to die for a lie. The prairie, moments before a slaughterhouse, now held its breath. Morgan writhed in the dust, his arm broken, his eyes burning with venom. You'll pay for this, he spat, blood flecking his lips. I'll bring the federal army, burn you all down. His voice shook not with power but with fear. Two Apache warriors seized him, dragging him forward like a beaten dog. Chief Taza rode to the broken fence, his ceremonial staff raised high. The sun, full and fierce, now lit his figure in golden fire. He turned to the gathered tribes, to Elias, bloodied but standing, to the sisters, towering like pillars of stone. His voice rumbled across the field, deep as thunder rolling over mountains. Today the truth stands uncovered. A man of law used rope not for justice but for theft. Blood was spilled, but it shall not drown this prairie. From this day forth, this land is ward-neutral territory. It belongs to no single hand, not Apache, not judge, not rancher, but to honor itself. The words struck like hammers on stone. Silence held the prairie. Even the wind seemed still. Then slowly heads bowed. The elders muttered assent. The tribe raised their weapons skyward, not in rage but in solemn agreement. Soldiers who remained watched in awe, seeing their cause dissolve in the light of morning. Elias stood, swaying, blood soaking his shirt, but he did not fall. His eyes, worn by years of loneliness, shone with something new. He had never sought to lead, never asked to carry the weight of tribes and settlers alike. Yet the choice had been thrust into his hands, and he had answered it not with cowardice, but with truth. Ayanna placed her massive hand on his shoulder, gentle despite its strength. Her gaze met his, steady and fierce. You are no longer alone, she said. You saved us from the noose and from silence. Now you carry this land's oath. Carry it with honor. Behind them, the three women stood like monuments carved from the earth, their broad shoulders glinting in the light. One had already fallen to the ancestors, her body burned in fire the night before. But the three who remained now bore their sister's strength doubled. Their presence was both shield and vow that Elias Ward would never again stand without allies. Judge Morgan, broken and cursing, was hauled away, his words fading into the distance. His men scattered, their loyalty shattered. The prairie, once soaked with dust and smoke, settled into silence. Elias looked across the field. The sun lit the torn earth, the abandoned rifles, the copper map still crumpled in his fist. He whispered hoarsely, not to the crowd, not even to Taza, but to the sky itself. The West will remember today not by who owned the land, but by who stood for justice. The prairie wind answered, cool and clean, carrying the ashes of battle away. That evening, beneath the wide sky, the Apache and settlers alike gathered around the charred oak where flames had taken the sister who did not survive. The tribe's morning song rose deep and low, echoing off the mountains. Elias stood apart at first, hat in hand, his eyes stinging. But when Ayana beckoned, he stepped into the circle. Together they laid stone over ashes, marking not an ending but a beginning. A new sign was raised on the broken fence. The letters cut deep into wood-ward neutral territory. No weapons beyond this point. Word would spread across the plains of a place where men could trade without fear, where Apache and settlers stood shoulder to shoulder, where guns gave way to peace. As the sun sank into a red horizon, Elias sat on the porch, bandages tight around his wounds, the copper map folded beside him. He looked at the three women, their silhouettes tall against the firelight, and felt the weight of a truth larger than himself. Family was not blood alone. Family was built in the moment one chose to stand, even when death's shadow loomed overhead. He raised his face to the sky, whispering softly, "Lord, the West has never been easy, but today it remembered honor." And for the first time in years, Elias Ward was not alone. The prairie, scarred and silent, carried a new promise, a fragile peace born in fire, bound by blood and guarded by giants. The prairie lay quiet at last. Smoke drifted low across the fields, and the blood-stained earth shimmered beneath the fading light. The echoes of gunfire had vanished, leaving only the sound of wind moving gently through the grass. Where death had nearly claimed the land, silence now carried the fragile weight of survival. Elias Ward stood with bandaged shoulder, his boots sunk deep into the churned dirt, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if trying to read what the future might bring. Behind him, the three surviving sisters, giants, once condemned to the noose, stood tall, their shadows stretching long in the twilight. They were no longer prisoners or victims. They were guardians, living monuments to resilience and defiance. At their side, Elias found not only allies but something he had long believed lost, a family forged in fire and truth. Chief Taza's words still echoed in his mind. This land belongs not to the greedy but to the honor shown here. It was more than a declaration. It was a vow that the prairie would not be consumed by endless cycles of blood and lies. That night, Elias sat at the edge of the fire, the copper map resting folded in his lap. He could have burned it, destroyed the proof that greed had driven men to slaughter innocents. But he kept it not as a trophy but as a warning. Evil often wears the mask of law. Justice is not found in seals or papers, but in choices made when the cost is highest. And this was the lesson carved deep into the land. Courage does not always roar in battle. Sometimes courage is the act of cutting a rope, of saving a life others deemed worthless, of standing between oppressor and oppressed, even when your own blood is demanded as payment. Elias had been just a poor rancher, a man of dust and silence, yet by refusing to turn away, he had reshaped the fate of the prairie. The story of that dawn would travel. Traders, wanderers, and settlers would whisper of the ward-neutral territory, a place where guns were laid down and truth was remembered. Some would scoff, others would test it, but all would come to see that peace was possible when honor stood taller than fear. For us, the lesson remains the same. The West, like life itself, is unforgiving, brutal, and quick to strip a man bare. But in its harshest moments, it also offers the chance to choose between silence or truth, between selfishness or sacrifice, between greed or justice. Elias Ward's choice reminds us that even one broken soul, scarred and weary, can become the spark that turns despair into hope. So when the world presses hard and the night feels endless, remember the dawn at the Ward fence. Remember that justice is not a gift from power but a duty of conscience. And remember that even in a land of dust and blood, a single act of mercy can light the way toward peace.